Hey folks, lately I've been thinking a lot about what does creating a new mind entail, right? What does it mean? I've been thinking about this for a whole host of reasons. One is that we are actually doing this, right? As a species, we've embarked on this project, which is all about creating a new mind. Right now, obviously, our LLMs, our AIs, are glorified pattern protectors, but the goal and the hope is that within a matter of at least a decade, maximum a couple of decades, we'll have created artificial intelligence in the sense that these systems will be like us in terms of having a mind, having memory, having sentience, having a conscious experience, right? So that's what we're doing. We are literally on and this is one of the most important projects of our species at the moment. Apart from that, also, I'm very fascinated by this, right? There are so many ways of creating a mind. It's just so that we only dealt with evolution, we only dealt with one species that's as intelligent as us, being our own species. So we haven't really uncovered any other ways or discovered or created any other ways. But I think it's a pretty safe bet to make that you can have human level intelligence through there are probably hundreds and thousands of pathways, possible pathways. And if you get into the nitty-gritty of it, like infinite pathways to get to human-like intelligence, right? Like we just need to meet an alien species that's evolved in completely different circumstances to be able to conclude that. It could be that there are some fundamental laws that are part of intelligence creation mechanism, but I think that's still so. I mean, when you think about it, the amount of path divergences that can happen that still gets you to human level intelligence. Again, all of this is in the abstract and the hypothetical, but it just seems to me that that is a pretty safe bet to make. So what we're doing is we're creating obviously AI, and we're also working on enhancing our own species, right? With brain-computer interfaces, we have socially engineered our societies, our relationships, our ways of interacting with technology, and technology is becoming an extension of ourselves, and it's becoming a deeply embedded part of us, right? And so we are going from the species you can say pre 10,000 BC, we are a different species. Then after 10,000 BC, we started getting into agriculture. That changed our ways fundamentally. We went from hunting and gathering to just sticking in one place. That created a lot of institutions, a lot of different ways of being. And then the next big transition was obviously religion, printing press, industrial revolution, computer revolution, all of these things, right? One of the biggest revolutions, well, the biggest revolution in human history and human timelines is taking place right now, which is the human refactoring, human enhancement revolution, right? Where we are literally, not just through obviously these extended technologies, but we are going to start putting chips in our brains. We're going to start selecting our genes. We're going to start clipping our genes out. We're going to start being able to start creating designer babies, right? And even designer cells, right? Designer babies is the first step, but you could imagine like we could literally change our genetic makeup over time by the year 2070, 2090, whatever, right? So these things are happening. This is inevitable. This is the path that we are on. There's nothing about these things these questions which is intractable, especially once we get AGI and ASR, right? These problems are going to become that much easier to solve. So this is happening, which is quite a lot of interesting questions, right? So I'm going to talk about some of those questions. I want to write a really long piece on this, which is going to be in my book, because this is a topic which is ripe for discussion and exploration and just deep philosophical inquiry, right? So we're going to do that, but for this one I'm going to keep it short. I'm going to keep it I'm going to pose some questions. I'm going to talk about a few things that we want to really think hard about when we start, because we want to be proactive, we want to be smart about this, right? When you create something new, something as radical as a new species, which is what we're doing, you want to be really thoughtful, you really want to be conscious. So the first question is, what does it mean to create humanity 2.0, right? It'll be better. But in what sense will it be better? Right, biologically better to attain the drives that we have, but we've got so many distinct drives, right? We've got the drive to create, drive to explore, drive to procreate, drive to learn, drive. I mean, there are these fundamental biological drives, and then we tacked on some drives which are being emergent drives, right? Like these are not fun biologically. They're not happening at the base level of our brain, but they're happening at a higher level, and at this point, with how evolved we've become as a species, right, we can almost, well, many of us can completely override our biological drives. For example, monks, right, their drive to attain nirvana or to attain godhood, self-realization can overcome. And these might they might otherwise have had strong physical sexual drives. They can overcome those drives because they're that particular drive can overcome that, right? Same with people who pursue Newtons of the world, right? He might have made a conscious decision that if he wants to become the, not that he would have made that conscious decision of wanting to become the greatest scientist of in human history, but if he wanted to uncover the secrets of the universe, he might have come to the conclusion that uh, mating is a distraction, right? He wants to be fully focused and immersed in that pursuit. So in that case, he wants to channel all of his energies, and so he might have also made that conscious decision. And we see this all the time with so many scientists, and so many people who pursue other like monkhood and all of that, right? So this is something that humanity has done, right? Being able to override our base drives and being able to become a manifestation of our higher drives. Let's put it that way. So okay, so humanity 2.0, if we are creating that, we're creating that in a lab, right? And so this is going to be a company or a group that's going to create that. It's not like everyone's going to it could potentially be the case that you could put a scaffolding on top of people's brains that can help them enhance the hard drives. And yeah, so that could be, but I think that's still a bit further away. I think what's going to happen first of all is that we're going to decide that what, this is the human, this is the kind of person that we want, right? So I mean, the version of this is we've been socially engineering people to be a certain way in the Western world, right? We want people to be in the liberal mold of being, right? It is radically different from the kinds of people that we had back in the day, right? If you go back to 19th century, 18th century, people used to be very intolerant. We are a very different species, not just technologically, but in terms of our value set compared to our very close, relatively close ancestors, right? Like just go a generation back, actually, yeah. So we're actually becoming a new species every single year, every single generation. It's just that this process is going to be accelerated substantially over the next 10 years or the next decades. So I'm going to talk about what does this humanity 2.0 look like? And also, what does the humanity n.0 look like, right? What's the ultimate version of humanity look like once you attain perfection? Like, once you determine that, like this, for example, if you're a religious person, then you would know that, this is the person I want to be, like, following the book, right? The Bible, the Quran, the Gita, the Torah, is it Torah? Not sure. Zuran, not sure about what that book is called. Anyways, following the book to the letter, right? You become the perfect manifestation of what your religion, what your God wants you to be if you follow that book to the letter. We don't have any guidebook for that for humanity as a whole, so we'll have to come up with that in real time, right? So obviously this raises the question that who decides what goes in that particular book. There's some things that we can agree on relatively, right? Like we don't need to find agreement with all the various groups, but most liberal, open-minded, educated, intellectually inclined, purpose-inclined people can agree to certain things in life, right? Those being respecting other people and being kind and being loving to your people and forging these deep relationships, not being selfish, not being self-centered, not being chasing not having lust as a driving force, not having the 7 deadly sins as a driving force, right? Not being, it's just to a huge degree a huge part of the human condition. So if you divorce the human from the seven impulse, I mean, you can't really, if you remove all of those impulses completely, you don't have a human anymore, right? For example, lust is the drive. I mean, you could imagine a human that can mate without lust, right? the Star Trek, right? Like you actually got an example of that in literature, yeah. So you could imagine that, and you could imagine, for example, the drive for more to being divorced from greed, right? That drive for more could be drive for more for everyone rather just for you, right? And same with gluttony. Gluttony is obviously about having food but exceeding that limit, right? And you could, if you cap it at that moment. So for these various parts of our being, deficient parts of our being, right, vices, so to speak, you can have these fixes, and then you can start getting into the other elements of what could, like, there's humanity 2.0, there's humanity 2.0, but then there's humanity perfected, right? Humanity perfected, would we still want to mate as we do right now, like animals, right? Like being driven by our animal urges and just engaging in these animalistic acts? I think not. Um, Reproduction, for humanity N.0, the perfected version of humanity, would look radically different. My best guess would be that it could be telepathic, right? And it could be maybe touching the finger or something of that sort, right? Exchanging genetic material real quick, if we still are physical beings, right? I'm assuming that even the perfected version of humanity would be perfected, obviously. Yeah, it would still be operating in the physical realm. And so, that gets into the question that's a constraint that we're putting on this, right? Because a perfect version of humanity, a human, might not, like, if you think about the ultimate manifestation of us, right? Like, it could be pure thought beings, right? That don't have any concerns with the physical reality. But that might not be the perfect manifestation for most humans. So we're gonna get into that particular discussion. So yeah, that we don't know what that perfect version of humanity looks. One example that I can take from one of my favorite books is Vacuum Diagrams by Stephen Baxter. And there's this species that solved everything, right? They attained every single goal that a species might want to attain. And so they consciously become the species, and they solved every single bit of physics there is to be solved, right? They'll solve everything, they'll go provide every single piece of knowledge. The only things that they haven't acquired are things that are going to happen in the future, right? So, for example, there are puzzles for which you actually need to spend time. You just have to wait, right? The scientific quandaries, physical quandaries, and so they stake the entire existence of the species on solving that particular, or just taking in data. It's not even about solving it, but just taking data, right? So at that point, they're without any drives, without any joy and happiness or whatever, right? Pleasure. None of those drives match to them. Right? The only thing that matters, and I do wonder if that's the ultimate, because for us right now, we're so biologically driven, right? And such a huge part of our biology is about us chasing happiness and pleasure and all these states. But the higher you go, at least intuitively it feels to me, right? Intuitively it feels to me because you look at animals, you look at people who come from tribes and uneducated people, right? And again, this is not taking an elitist attitude to any of these groups or people, but you just look at that, and then you look at people who devote their entire lives to the sciences, the pursuits of the arts, the just pursuit of knowledge, right? And refining their intellectual faculties and all of those sort of things. And you see a categorical difference between those two categories: people who are just driven by base human drives, and people who are driven by the high human drives. And the difference is time, right? Like, this person that you see, this group, they were this particular group a few hundred years back, 1,000 years back, right? Like, for example, the modern Englishman was the same as the modern tribesmen of Africa 10,000 years back. It was just that these series of events happened, and which, I mean, not the same, but relatively the same, right? And then there were these massive divergences, which also takes me to another point. There'll be lots of people who will be perfectly happy staying what they are, right? And there will be substantial divergences between us as a species right now and humanity 2.0. And at some point, some of those other humans, they'll decide that, okay, you know what, this is the permanent spot that we want to occupy for the rest of eternity. And so we might have so many kinds of human species, like literally kinds of human species, that they might still be able to procreate with us simply because of their technological prowess, but they might be radically different in terms of their qualia, in terms of their consciousness, in terms of what they care about, their intelligence, all of those sort of things. So, question is, what happens to humanity 1.0, right, in that world? I think I mean, one is absorption, right? Like if these, not that these humanity, improved versions of humanity are going to be that, but they could just absorb us, but they could just gradual assimilation, right, over centuries and stuff. Where most humans who are subhumans, so we are the subhumans right now compared to that humanity 2.0. So yeah, this is not me being, I don't know what. So us being subhumans, we could, over time, more and more subhumans could decide that, we don't want to be that because the pro-humans, superhumans are better and that lead better lives, in all of the things that our drives care about, right? And so we could decide to just assimilate, but that still would be holdouts. I'm sure there'll always be holdouts, and we want there to be a space for holdouts, right? But we don't. I mean, freedom is the ultimate value that we want to be there in any human realm. So yeah, that could be one thing. That could be completely different worlds, right? Like one planet could be for humanity 1.0, one planet could be for humanity 2.0, one planet could be for humanity 19.0, one planet for humanity 25.0, right? Those sort of things. And another scenario could be many of these human species could coexist in one world, again, like Star Trek. Like, it actually happens right now, right? Like, if you look at the UK, for example, you got someone who's extremely well educated and extremely literate, extremely intellectual in the taste, right? And then you got someone who commits crime, leads a life of, complete criminality and druggery and drudgery and, right, like completely radical different specimens of the same species living in the same country, right? So we could have an extension of this even when the degree of divergences increase substantially. So that could be something. Now, before I end this piece, I want to talk about the motivations behind talking about this, right? One was obviously like we're literally doing this, but the other thing is that I'm also obsessed with perfection, right? I want to become the perfect version of myself. I don't want to become perfect per se, as in, the perfect specimen of humanity. Don't really give a damn about that. Right? I've got a vision of who my ideal self looks, what my ideal self looks like, right? Who's the person I would want to be. Like me being that person, at least at that point, from my current vantage point, I would be like, okay, this is the person I want to be, right? And I love the Matthew McConaughey framing on this, by the way. Like I think he gave a speech, and this is one of my favorite things I've taken from many speeches I've listened to by now. That my idol is the person that I'm going to be in 5 years, 10 years, right? And for example, when I'm 25, the person I'm going to be at 30, that person is my ideal, and my idol, both of them. And then when I'm 30, the person I'm going to be at 35, that's my idol. And same, it keeps on repeating, right? And I love that framing. But in my case, I take a different view, right? At some point, if I work hard enough, at some point I'll attain perfection, right? So I want to rid myself of certain deficiencies, certain vices, certain thought patterns, certain drives, right? And I want to amplify certain drives that I have: the creative drive, the connection drive, the drive, the thirst for knowledge, right? Curiosity drive, those sort of things. These are not as strong as I would want them to be. So yeah, there's a lot of work, right? So I've got a vision of what that person, what that Suraj looks like, and then there's me, right? And there's a gulf between the two. Is the gulf between, I'm trying to find a metaphor, but it's like the gulf between heaven and hell, right? Me, I'm hell. That's Suraj is heaven. Okay, I'm not hell. Definitely not hell. But I've got this vision of myself, perfect self, the ideal self, the platonic ideal, and I think I can become that person by 50, right? This person, and I tend to think about that a whole lot. If I put in the work, if I work really intensely hard, like prioritize that as being one of my core, and like that'll obviously be one of my core priorities, right? Apart from my companies, like those two things, like becoming that person and building these companies want to impact billions of lives with. Right, those are the two main missions of my life. The third being if I have a family, but that's don't know whether that's going to happen. So the two absolute missions of my life are these two, right? So the theme of perfection, like what does a perfected human look like? Like that's something that's been running on my mind for the longest time. And this discussion was an extension of that when you apply this thinking, and we're already doing this in so many ways to humanity as a whole. Also, I want to touch upon one last thing before we move on. What does the perfect AI look like, right? Like right now we've got AI 0.8. At some point we'll have AI 1.0, which is real AI, right? Learning, memory, planning, reasoning, problem solving, like real stuff, not just glorified pattern protector. At some point we'll have that, and at some point we'll have an AI with a mind, right? Our current AIs and our AIs, at least for the foreseeable future, they're not going to have a mind per se. But at some point we'll have an AI mind, and so at that point it'll become a species unto itself. At least morally, that's the conclusion that we should converge to, a species. And so at that point, because we are creating this new mind, this new species, we ought to ask, what does a perfect AI look like? Right? I mean, there are things that we already talked about as a species, right? Like we discussed that should help us solve disease and death and all of those, and help us solve grand unified theory, help us solve those sort of things. But we want to go deeper. I mean, one obvious way in which this AI would be perfect is that its moral system, value system, goal system, and drives would be completely, not 90%, but completely convergent to ours, right? Now the question is that, well, we could hit upon a paradox that it might be physically impossible for this to be the case, because if intelligence scales up and wisdom scales up, right, the drives that might emerge from that might not ever be completely 100% compatible, and that's what creates the alignment problem. This is for another discussion, just for another book that we again hope to solve with LNT. Right, LNT, again, one of our goals is to create a new mind, which actually is one of the big reasons why I've been thinking a lot about this, right? Like because the LNT mind that will create, which will power all of our AIs, that AI, we want that to be perfect. That AI, we want that to be perfectly aligned. Now the question is that, can those two ever be completely compatible? Obviously we'll do our very best just to bridge the gap, but these are things that you can never completely predict, right? Like you've got to put in the work and build the stuff before you got the results, before you can make any educated guesses. So that's what we're going to do. Hopefully over the next few years we'll have raised enough capital to be able to, because LNT mind is a core part of the alignment problem, right? This is not me being arrogant, but it just says. And so that's one of the key drivers behind my many hours spent thinking about what does the perfect mind look like. So I'm going to write a lot about this, write quite a few essays about this, publish this on the site. But I think this should be it for now. I'll catch you guys soon. Take care.